Wikipedia article. Crisis in Venezuela. Venezuela's ongoing crisis, rooted in socio-economic and political instability, began during Hugo Chávez's presidency and escalated under his successor, Nicolás Maduro. Initially driven by policies meant to redistribute wealth, the crisis has transformed into one of the worst economic disasters in modern peacetime history, surpassing even notable crises such as the U.S. Great Depression and Zimbabwe's hyperinflation period in 2008-2009. This situation has led to widespread hunger, disease, crime, and emigration, affecting nearly every facet of Venezuelan life. Origins and worsening of the crisis. Chávez, who led Venezuela from 1999 until his death in 2013, initiated various social programs known as Bolivarian missions, using the nation's vast oil revenues. These missions initially resulted in a reduction of poverty, and improvements in healthcare, literacy, and housing. However, Chávez's policies, including nationalizations and price controls, were highly dependent on high oil prices and led to structural imbalances in the economy. This created conditions similar to Dutch disease, where reliance on oil exports weakened other sectors. Overspending and economic mismanagement, including price and currency controls, eventually became unsustainable, causing inflation, shortages, and a decline in overall productivity. Upon Maduro's ascent to power in 2013, Venezuela's economic decline accelerated. The fall of global oil prices in 2015, compounded by a drop in oil production due to a lack of maintenance and investment, triggered the most severe phases of the crisis. The Maduro government exacerbated the situation by refusing to cut spending, repressing dissent, and denying the existence of a crisis even as opposition parties declared a humanitarian health crisis in 2016. Hyperinflation, starvation, and emigration. Venezuela's hyperinflation reached unprecedented levels, peaking at over 1.35% in 2018, rendering the national currency, the bolivar, nearly worthless. As a result, Venezuelans increasingly turn to the US dollar for transactions. Chronic food and medicine shortages ensued, with millions of citizens unable to meet their basic needs. By 2017, 75% of the population had lost an average of 8 kilograms, over 19 pounds, due to malnutrition. By 2021, around 5.4 million people, or roughly 20% of the population, had fled the country, seeking refuge in neighboring Latin American nations. The impact of the crisis is profound. 94.5% of Venezuelans were living in poverty by 2021, with 76.6% living in extreme poverty. Humanitarian conditions continue to deteriorate despite the Maduro government's reluctant acceptance of limited international aid in recent years. Government repression and international response. Maduro's administration has responded to growing opposition and public discontent with violent repression, including extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detentions, and crackdowns on protests. In 2017 alone, over 5,200 people were killed by government forces, according to the United Nations. These actions have drawn widespread condemnation and sanctions from the international community, including the European Union, the Lima Group, and the United States. Sanctions have targeted government officials, military leaders, and key sectors like petroleum. International actors remain divided on the causes of the crisis. While Maduro's supporters blame foreign intervention, sanctions, and an economic war waged by the business elite, most economists and analysts cite government corruption, economic mismanagement, and undemocratic governance as the primary culprits. The Maduro regime, heavily reliant on authoritarian measures and control over state institutions, has resisted calls for free elections and democratic reform, deepening the political crisis. Conclusion. The socio-economic and political crisis in Venezuela has been one of the most severe in the modern world, reshaping the country's economy, politics, and society. Despite some temporary stabilization due to economic liberalization in 2022, Venezuela remains one of the most unequal countries in the Americas. Poverty and inflation are still persistent, and millions of Venezuelans continue to seek a way out of their country's seemingly endless downward spiral. The long-term recovery of Venezuela will depend on deep structural reforms, including political change, international support, and a new economic model that moves beyond the state's dependence on oil.